I think as soon as we start pulling it apart, it just becomes really complicated. What is play? What is nature? The amount of conversations about antisocial behaviour that was going on, because that's how we see children's play when it's not supervised by adults is antisocial behaviour.
Prove the effect of forest school through some sort of action research project. And then usually they're like, oh my God, this is great. It's doing what you said it would. Now we believe you because you've put numbers on paper. Well, what does it mean for childhood? But also, what does it mean for society in as a whole?
I don't think we can. I think we've started a revolution, so we just better crack on with it, eh?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this conversation about play. And I'm very grateful to be joined by the lovely Lily Horseman, who is very knowledgeable about play and forest score. So, welcome, Lily.
Hi, hello, how you doing? You all right?
Good, thank you. It's a beautiful, slightly blustery and cloudy day, but enjoying kind of the, the wind go whoosh in through the trees today.
So, we've got hailstones. It's the early June, and there are massive hailstones bouncing off everything. So, not quite sure what that means for the future. Yeah, feels very exciting.
Cool. Thank you for being here. Um, you've been involved with the forest school world for a long time, but perhaps can we start with you maybe explaining how did you get to forest school? A little bit about your journey to start us off.
That's a great question. So I was involved with play and playwork before I was involved with Forest School, and I was working with children of traveller families and marginalised families, and then found my way into Forest School by I was working for a wildlife trust, and we started a project called something called the Wild Play Project back now more than 20 years ago that was. And so the Wild Play Project was quite interesting. It was a lot about children's play and connection with nature, but wasn't Forest School. But actually that was at the same time as Forest School was emerging in the area that I was in, and the things sort of wove together in my experience, and that's how I sort of got involved with Forest School, and yeah, became part of the Forest School movement. But bringing my strand of play with me into that as well.
Mm, thank you. And of course, play or like high quality play in nature is kind of what I see the almost the aim of the forest school process to try and get to that point. But
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we talk about play in nature, and it's dead easy to have that as a shorthand, but I think as soon as we start pulling it apart, it just becomes really complicated. What is play? What is nature? What is a natural environment? What is children's play in nature like? What are the factors that affect those things? So yeah, um there's so much kind of juice in that and kind of stuff to reflect on. And that's one of the things that was really interesting for me is I feel like I've been mulling over the same sorts of questions for more than 25 years, and I'm not bored of them yet because like each person you connect with or each person you talk to, we come up with a different facet of it, and that's quite interesting, isn't it?
mm. So where have you got to so far with your mulling over? Like, let's start. What is play?
What is play? What is play? So, I mean, that's a really interesting thing. It's one of those questions that I really like to pose to any group of adults who are working with children, especially ones who are working with the children's interests in their hearts. So what is play? And the answers that come back, is often about plays when children are learning, which it is. Play is fun, which it is. Play is what children do to experiment and challenge themselves, which it is. But it's also, what play doesn't have to be. So there's lots of questions lots of answers we could come up with. Like play is social, but play doesn't have to be social. Play is investigating and discovering new things, but play doesn't have to be investigating and discovering new things. So you see what I mean? Like already we can get into this really interesting discussion and debate about what play is. And there's various folk over the years who have defined play. So there's a sort of playwork movement, very akin to the Forest School movement, and Play Wales and Play Scotland and Play England. There's various folk who look after that. And the playwork principles say that is when children have control over the content and the intent of their play. So play is when of their actions. So content is what they do, and intent is why they do it. So that's what is when play is when children have control over the content, what they do, and the intent, why they do whatever they're doing. But then even that is quite interesting, isn't it? Because it's like, so if there's other children, that influences what they do. If there's adults around, that influences what they do. How much control do children actually have when there are other people around? So yeah, yeah, like I say, it's a very interesting thing. Like play is fun, but does it have to always be fun? And are there things that happen when children play that aren't fun? And I think that's quite interesting as well, that children's play often takes them to those tricky places where they're trying to work out um, their experiences, their lives, their understanding of how things fit together. And that's what they're doing through their play. So again, that's not necessarily fun. It gets quite complicated. See what I mean? Like we can go all over the place, can't we? It
The right mashup.
is a right mashup. Yeah, exactly that.
And it's interesting that definition you gave there about children having control over what they do and why they're doing it, right? Like, why control as a focus there in that definition? That seems like an interesting choice of why just focus on control in that definition as opposed to something else like connection or do you see what I mean? Like some other aspect. It's making me wonder whether perhaps in our culture, our society, our children have so little autonomy or control over their own lives, whether that is the primary factor in our society.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Like the choice of language in things is always telling, I guess, about the context in which things are, which concepts are being developed as well. The kind of why control is a useful word there. And you're right. I mean, if we think about even the last 30 to 40 years, the sort of lack of autonomy, lack of spaces in which children can be autonomous, where they have that control, is becoming greater and greater. And actually, the impact then on children's play is seen through that, talking about play deprivation and a lot of the conversations about play deprivation 20, 30 years ago were looking at, linking it with actual, with other forms of deprivation as well. So, it kind of comes along with that. But actually seeing now play deprivation as being like a cultural thing, like it's pretty universal, the amount of time and space children have to play in which they have control and they don't have somebody watching and guiding or judging or shaping their play is it's tiny, isn't it? It's dwindling. And that where children do have those spaces, what they're perceived as those spaces. I'm thinking about some of the projects that some of my colleagues do where they're working with children who are playing out, and those children are playing out on the housing estates in their local area. And the reason that one of the things that initiated that project was the amount of conversations about antisocial behaviour that was going on because that's how we see children's play when it's not supervised by adults is antisocial behavior because that's where we are as a society. So actually then that means that even those children who do have access to those play spaces, actually those play spaces are being quite eroded and quite judged and quite yeah, threatened because of how we perceive children's play.
Which is really ironic when play is so important for social development, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, so then what's the impact of being, I mean, what we now, I heard somebody say recently, I was attending some Playwork Foundation webinars and they were talking about play deprivation and saying, we're kind of seeing the impact of maybe second or third generation play deprivation. Now, that's what we see as a culture. And like, holy guacamole, what, what does that mean for how, like you say, that's like how we react and respond to one another. Because if play is how children develop their social skills, which is one of the things that happens when children play, then we don't have those spaces that aren't policed heavily by adults. Then children don't get to kind of test some of those skills, and then they're left to test them when they're in their late teens or early 20s, or and then it becomes a lot trickier. I'm just thinking about I was with a 3-year-old yesterday, and he was really enjoying. He had a big like tube, and he was really enjoying shouting down the tube to me, "I hate you! You really need to go away!" I was like, "Shall I go away?" And he went, "No, no, come back! I hate you!" And he was really loving that, like, power of being able to shout transgressive things down a tube at an adult that he'd only just met. Like, I was like, "Hello," and that was, but kind of seeing the impact of that and testing out some of those things that, because a lot of the time, oh, don't say the bad words, got to play nicely, and then actually, if you save up all of those tests until you're then 18 or 20, or it becomes a lot more serious, doesn't it? Actually, then standing in the middle of the street shouting, "I hate you, you need to go away," and then like, the repercussions of that,
Yeah.
those tests of being a social human.
Yeah, totally. Can get a lot more dodgy and
Yeah,
dangerous.
right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, what, like that figure there, we said possibly 2 to 3 generations into play deprivation. Like, so what,
Mm.
I mean, what does that mean for, well, what does it mean for childhood, but also what does it mean for society in as a whole?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? Yeah, because if we think about what play does for humans, so play is how we kind of test the conditions of being human. It's there's an ethnologist whose name I can't pronounce. I'll maybe email it to you so you can put it on the screen here or something like that. But this ethnologist who said that play is scientific experiments conducted by children. And I think that sort of, testing the world and experimenting with how it is and how things respond, and we need a lot of time to do that, to do it socially, to do it emotionally as well, and as well as then all the kind of practical, physical, creative stuff as well that we test. Um, but yeah, working through all those things that means what it is to be a human. Yeah, you're right. Like if we're then people theorize that we're in second generation, third generation of play deprivation. What are those core things that we're missing as humans that then we look for other things to fill the void? I'm just thinking about how much conversation there is about dopamine addiction, for example. Like that's that feedback from the world, isn't it? That people crave and seek. And actually, I'm wondering now if that's part of this bigger impact of not having that time for free play and experimentation, and being able to test the world, and that going on into our adult lives as well, because play is fundamental to children's development, but I also think it's a human thing, right? It's just like we need to play, whether that's um, how we socialize, how we do our leisure time, whatever it is, but it's that condition of feeling freedom and flexibility and fun and all of those things that kind of, yeah, make you feel alive and make you feel human, I think.
Totally. I'm trying to remember that Froebel quote about play. It's something like along the lines of, didn't Frederick Froebel say, play is the highest form of human, or that play is the highest expression of human development for in childhood, for it alone is the free expression of what's in a child's soul.
Oh, I haven't got that quote to in my Rolodex of play quotes. That's nice. I'll have to look that one up.
Something
Yeah.
along that line.
So then if we don't get to express what's in our soul, if play deprivation is lack of opportunity to express what's in our soul, does that then become part of the disconnect with who we are and who other people are? And again, sort of thinking about the narratives around disconnected societies and disconnected humans and fracturing of society and communities, if we're not in touch with our soul of who we are, then it can be harder to connect. It can be harder to make those, um, yeah, yeah, deep moments of connection. Hmm, interesting.
Mm. It's
And then,
interesting.
well, and my brain then goes on to like, so then what is our responsibility as folk who are then able to hold those spaces for play? How does that, if we're kind of in this quite, um, I'm trying not to overblow what I'm saying, you know what I mean? But like, if we're saying that society is struggling and that play is one of the things that helps people connect with themselves and that will support people to struggle less, then we have a responsibility as folk who work with children and young people to make those spaces for play and try and make them really valid spaces for play where we don't kind of put the badge of play on, but then use it as another way to coerce children into what we want them to do, right? Because
Mm.
it looks nice for the internet, or because it's what the parents or the line managers or the senior leadership team want to see, or there's outcomes that we need to reach. And that's that's a real challenge, isn't it, for us as practitioners, I always think.
Totally. Um, and something that I've wondered about is like why is play not valued for play's sake, as in true play? Why is it not valued? Even the word sometimes gets like I've heard early years practitioners say that they're not allowed to use the word play at work or to the parents because you know the parents perceive that as a bad thing. They're sending their early years, their 3 and 4 year olds to an early years setting, and if the kids come home saying that they've played all day, that the parents will take that as a negative thing, and so they
Wow.
have to say I've been self-directing my learning or whatever. They literally banned the word play at this setting that they were telling me. You're like, what? Something that is as crucial to humanity as play, the expression of what's in a child's soul, and you don't want to use that word.
Yeah. But just playing. Oh, I was just playing. It is it's a word that gets diminished a lot, isn't it? It's a concept that gets diminished a lot. And I think, that's one of our responsibilities is to be able to advocate for play when we're talking to other people and be the champions of play, and say, yes, they were playing. Yes, and this is why we make this space. But then there's another little loop in there where we get into justifying children's play by what they get out of it. And actually, again, that's putting a judgment on it, isn't it? Of being able to say those things. But actually that's one of the ways in which we can advocate for play in a society that doesn't value it, is being able to say, this is what they were doing, and this is what I could see, and this is what I could, will how I see that helping their development and all of those aspects as well. But yeah, actually in an ideal situation we could say, yes, they played today. And people were like, great, all day. Yes, yes, all day. That was what happened. And seeing the intrinsic value of play would be extraordinary, wouldn't it, really? Yeah, really, really interesting. Do you know what? I was saying about those Playwork Foundation things that I did, and I was just thinking about intervention in children's play and how we intervene. Can I show you some things that I
Yeah,
found quite
totally.
interesting? Intervention styles. So there's let me find it. I'm rummaging under the under the table for various little notes. I think it might be this one. Yeah, intervention styles. There we go. Um, so this is one of the intervention styles. Do we wait to be invited to play? So just thinking about what's our role, like, when we're observing children playing, do we try and insert ourselves in their play in order to kind of understand it and see its value, or do we wait to be invited to play? And then when we are invited to play, do we play on the child's terms, or do we try and change the play in order to either meet our play needs because let's own those in any environment where children are playing. Let's own that we also have play needs as well and recognize that where ours might be taking up all of the space that the children might invite us into the play, but then our play needs can overtake and take up the oxygen of the play space and leave very little space for the children. And I think that's one of the things I'm always mindful of is like how if I'm invited into the play, how can I also remove myself as well so I don't become a linchpin in the children's play because it can be really good fun to be turned into a frog and then a toad and then a rabbit and then a cat and then trapped in a thing and you get into those cycles, don't you, where children are playing and you're kind of involved with it, but actually what's the way out of it as well so that you're not the kind of key thing in the children's play. So that's one thing I've been um thinking about recently. And then here's another one. So um about the play being uninterrupted by adults as well. And that's one of those, I guess, because if we think about how we try and justify the play, it can be really, it can sometimes feel really important for us to find out what's going on in order that we can justify the play. So we see children in a play state and then we'll be kind of like, oh, tell me what you're playing with and oh, and what's this doing here and how are you doing this? And we start asking those questions in order to try and draw out our observations. But actually, that's a really good way of just like getting in and just like trashing all of the flow and the engagement and the kind of intense uh, focus that's going on in those moments. And I think that's something that, again, recognizing that we're advocates, but actually not getting involved in order to try and get material for our advocate. We can observe that rather than necessarily yeah, get all involved in that as well. I don't know if you've got any observations around that, if that feels like a thing that is challenging to us as practitioners as well, because it feels like those two are for me sometimes.
Interesting. Yeah, the compulsion to justify the play and therefore trying to find out that information. Um, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think, do you know what's just coming to me? We were talking about the word control earlier in the definition. Um, I think I have a hypothesis. See what you think about this hypothesis. I wonder whether one of the barriers to play happening is that adults have a fear, whether they're parents or practitioners, but they have a fear of letting go of the control uh, in terms of safety, in terms of decision making, in terms of things. And I'm wondering whether that fear of, I guess it's like a shift of power, is it? The way that the child is then got the control over what they're doing and the reasons they're doing it. Whereas, in a classroom, like I've been a teacher of kids, you've got your learning objective. So I've chosen what that is. I don't know, to recognize two-dimensional shapes or whatever. I've chosen the why in terms of, and then I've chosen the what in terms of how we're going to do that. Um, in play, as an adult, you've got to relinquish all of that and like trust the process.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's a bit it's not linear, like if you take that lesson plan, it's very linear. So this is the
Yeah.
learning outcome. This is what we're going to do step by step. Boom, boom, boom. Jobs are good and tick the box.
Yeah.
Even though
Shortest way from A to B.
Exactly.
Yes.
Even though the reality of it is that not all the children are actually following that linear path. In fact, I would dare to say the majority of the children are not following that linear path
Mm.
because they're unique, beautiful individuals doing their own thing. But there's the illusion
Right.
that there's almost the illusion that the adult's in control.
Yes. Yeah. And that. and that comfort level that we have of the illusion of control is part of it, isn't it? Because actually giving power away can feel really scary, and sort of recognizing that in ourselves, especially when the children's experience of play might also be greater than our own. So I'm thinking about types of play that can really push adult buttons, like play that's quite risky, children climbing to great heights, moving at speeds, um, doing things that are, precarious and things like that. That can really push our adult buttons, and we feel like, oh, I have to be seen to be in control. But actually, those children are really getting those feelings of power for themselves out of those moments as well, aren't they? And then sometimes children's play can go into quite uncomfortable places. I've got, I've got, I think, oh, right, recently I was like, oh, I need to do more social media. Right, okay, I'm going to take some little reels. It'll be lovely. I've got stuff in that. This could never go on the online because there's a group of children who are narrating what's going on. They're like, yeah, and then this one takes one of the babies of these up to the mountain and sacrifices it, and then this is the catacombs where all the bodies go. And I was just like, oh, do you know, the thought of putting this online and the kind of narrative and discussion that will come back for it, I don't think I've got the I haven't got for context, it was little bits of stick with faces that were in the catacombs. It was not anybody like other children in the placemates or anything like that. No actual babies were sacrificed. But that's quite dark stuff, isn't it? And thinking about how children need to play through those themes, and how, as an adult, it can be really easy to want to shut those down because our values are being challenged, our um what we think children should be doing. This whole kind of play nicely, I think, is a really strong narrative, isn't it? And it's very tempting to kind of want children to play in those ways, but actually, if they're experiencing stuff out in the world, and that's the data that's coming into their brains, so things from the news, things from computer games, things from um, oh, do you know, I think the rise of Greek mythology in children's literature, like that's got a lot to answer for, because you can see the rise of the Greek myth coming back into children's literature, and like the themes that are coming into children's play. I'm like, oh, hello, these are back. Nice to see. I think it's quite interesting, so children are taking this data in, and it's going to have to come out. And if it can come out through their play, then that's how they process that data in, play out, and if they don't get to play out that material, then actually it becomes stuck, and they have that unplayed out material, which can become much more difficult for them to integrate with their understanding of how the world works and how that goes on. Yeah. So that's one of the ones. So these are from Bob Hughes wrote them. I don't know if they were in anything before this, but in the first claim, looking at kind of how play environments could be assessed and what's the role of adults, and this idea of like allowing children to explore their own values, being part of, as play workers, are we able to do that as people who are supporting children's play? Are we able to do that? And that can be quite tricky because we all have we have really strong values. I'm thinking about my strong values around environmentalism and seeing children's play that can, I was watching some children yesterday and they're picking up woodlice, and I was like really wincing for the woodlice because they're quite small children, and but that them wanting to engage with those, and seeing my values of wanting the children to be careful with those woodlice coming through and influencing their play.
Mm.
But that's my strong value around environmentalism, and it's, yeah, that's a tricky balance there, isn't it?
Mm. I would say that's a familiar one for me as well, actually. Lily Rose seems to be going through a phase at the moment where she's catching like flies, like little midgy type flies in the garden. She's catching them and squishing them. And I find like, oh, poor, why? Just why? Why? And then, having conversations, like, so I chose to have conversations with her about, death, I suppose, from that, which it's an interesting concept, right? You're a small child, and the concept of death and dying and something being no more, it's something that even as older adults we grapple with, right? Death and stuff. And so yeah, through play perhaps is how we make sense of the world, including those big, scary concepts. Not that death is scary, in my opinion, but
It's a thing that's treated as scary, isn't it? It's a thing that's treated, it's a thing that we push away from ourselves. And actually, whenever you're with, I've accompanied children quite a few times when we found dead things and seeing their responses to them is really interesting because they're so curious and so um touched by it and like can really get into that, oh, and will its family be sad, and like how will this be for, like those like you say, those big concepts, those big things, like children aren't afraid of those and they're quite intrigued and quite interested in those, aren't they? There's a girl I was with last week and she said, oh, this woman at the park, she said, oh, well, I did not like this woman at the park. And I was like, well, what did she do? She said, well, I was just looking at this dead bird. So this girl's, was she probably about 9? She said, I was just looking at this dead bird, and this woman asked my mum if I was okay in the head. It's just like, and like her level of indignation at this, she was like, but I was just curious to see its skull, and like, seeing how she already could feel the judgment at 9, 8, 9, 10 maybe at most. She could already feel the judgment of adults on, but no, I was just being curious about this. I was like, it's okay. I will bring out my box of skulls and let's have a little look, and I can show you the ones I've collected. And I guess that's also that, like seeing who you are in the world as well, seeing that there are people with different values to you. But actually, no, this is important to me, and kind of working through some of those big things is what children are trying to do, aren't they? They're trying to kind of get that socio-cultural understanding of who I am and how I operate and who are other people and how does that all work, and yeah, all of this comes through their play because that's how children are making sense of the world. It's what's helping their development in that way.
and just like hearing that, um, it reminds me of. Can I share a little story? Like, so Lily Rowe likes playing with dead things as well. I, if we find them, um, and a while ago we found a dead squirrel when we were in the playground. It was recently deceased. It wasn't too manky or anything, and this was when she was about 2. And so she was immediately drawn to that squirrel, and she wanted, to pick it up. And it basically spent like over an hour with this dead squirrel, playing with it in the playground, taking it in an ambulance. There's a little car thing in the thing, and this whole complex thing. It went on the swing. It went down the slide. And anyway, I did happen to have my camera with me, so I did take some footage. And you're talking about like social media reels stuff, right? So I did put it out as a short, right?
Okay.
Interestingly, that short is one of my most watched shorts, but it's also the one that has obviously upset people the most because there's some very um strong-minded comments in it. So it's obviously something that adults have different opinions on. There were some comments in support of that. There were some comments that were very much against it. So I find that really fascinating again in terms of how adults' values will either support the flow of play
Mm.
or will shut it down.
Right. Because it's really like quite quickly you could say, don't touch that, it's dirty, it's a dead thing, you shouldn't be playing with dead things, be respectful. Whatever your value set that you come at that from, it's really easy to get then that however long you were saying, like, long extended play frame would never have existed, right? And all of that kind of understanding and um study and curiosity, there's no place for it, is there? And it's, yeah, what, yeah, so how does our response, and not just our, oh, lovely dear response, like the kind of, how's our genuine response to that affect children's play as well. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Sort of seeing how that content and intent, how powerful we are as agents of change when we're observing children's play or around children's play. Because yeah, our reactions and interactions can change the content and the intent, what they're doing and why they're doing it.
And it makes me think like, well, and also like, why should an adult's value be more important than a child's as well? Because that again is often what happens in terms of the balance of power. Like again, whether it's parents or practitioners, the value of the adult becomes the rules of
Yeah,
how you play or
yeah,
what you do.
yeah.
It's very interesting again, sort of society
Yeah,
where
and some of the sort of recent sort of studies of how the brain and play shows that the play the bits get lit. I don't know how brain studies work. You know what I mean? I just imagine them poking a thing and seeing things light up, but particularly around mammals and how they play. The bits that light up are the survival parts of the brain. So actually, if we're talking about like we're not just talking about a thing that's nice to do. It's like this fundamental to do in order to develop as a human, like as a mammal. That it's the survival parts of our brains that are engaged in play, and that's I think that sort of going back to that importance of play and why allowing children to have that time and space, but also that control and power is really helpful because it's yeah building on their survival part of their brain and that fundamental wiring. Mm.
and that's really interesting, right? In terms of like looking at animal studies at play, because uh, as I understand it, pretty much all mammals play, don't they? Even some birds, some reptiles are
Yeah.
known to play. So I guess evolutionarily speaking, if you believe Darwin and his theory of evolution, then it must be really important, right? Otherwise, it would have evolved out.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. But then are we pushing it out? And is that part of the kind of, yeah, what are we missing by pushing out play from our, like this bit that's like in the survival part of our brain? If we're pushing it out, what does that mean for us as a society and as humans? Yeah.
yeah, totally. Yeah, we're pushing out something that's biologically necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
Or
that Bob Hughes quote, isn't there, that play puts children in the driving seat of their biological development and it is that, yeah, like it is a fundamental biological need as well as a social need and as a cultural need and all of those other things as well. Yeah.
it's kind of making me think of like Richard Louv and, Last Child in the Woods. Well, that must be over 20 years old now, mustn't it? That book. That like one of his main points in the book is that a lot of the modern ills of childhood, physical health problems, mental health problems, kind of all could be tracked back to lack of play in nature.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and so then, like I say, when we are the folk who are advocating for play in nature, actually, are we doing play as much of a service as we can? Are we championing a thing, but actually what we're allowing and what we are able to, or what we feel comfortable offering, isn't that because of the other agendas that we're beholden to as well? I'm just thinking about needing the need to report back to other people, parents or decision makers or funders or leaders or whoever that is, and kind of, and that I think the more we can develop our understanding of play and more we can gather together the evidence of the importance of play, then we've got that actually, yes, they were playing. Not just playing, they were playing, and this is why we make that space and time for them because yeah, the kind of critical importance of that is not to be understated, I guess.
So how would you go about that if you had, don't know, a head teacher, a manager, or a parent who was like, no, no, curriculum outcomes is what's important. How would you fight and advocate for play?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like it, thanks. Um, I guess finding out what the needs of that person are. So whoever's kind of coming at you with a question, like what's their need, what's their agenda, and you're right, it is often that um are they meeting the targets? Is that being met? Okay, so what are the challenges that the person that I'm advocating for to play is meeting? Okay, so it's around social engagement. So then that would be the kind of thing I'd be going, oh, so there's a lot of evidence that, and then I'd go off and find that evidence and like a friend of mine referred to me as the credible Hulk. I always cite my sources. It's just like so I'd find the hook that decision maker, is it around um their attention span? Okay, so let's find the evidence that play supports children's attention, and then cite sources, like send them that evidence, show them how it works, and then it's that, isn't it? Sometimes people need to see the evidence, they need to see the proof that you just saying it passionately isn't quite enough for people because they'll also have somebody who's, trying to squash their time and space and decision making down as well. So they're also probably having to fight their agendas. So giving them the proof, giving them the evidence can be a really powerful way to support that. So yeah, that would be my strategy. How about you? What would you say?
Uh, Very similar. In fact, I ran a webinar called Evaluate to Advocate.
Nice. And it nearly rhymes. Lovely.
Um, but along those same lines, yeah, find out what is the latest initiative that head teacher is worried about, or that Ofsted has picked up in the last report or something. Find out what their needs are, as you said. Maybe find research like you were saying that already exists, proper research, but also don't underestimate the value of like action research as a practitioner, and maybe creating a little methodology to, if it's attention spans, or uh, collect some data basically through observing your group, um, based on what the key priorities are for that decision maker. Either using, there are existing scales out there for all sorts of different things, or create your own. And
Mm,
I mean, for every single forest school program that I have ever run, I have always had to start with a pilot, because getting a school or an organization to commit for like a full year's program right from the word go is almost impossible. So it usually starts with a short program, 6 to 8 weeks, and you have to prove,
yeah,
I'd
yeah,
say
yeah,
bunny rabbit ears,
yeah,
you
yeah,
have
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
prove the effect of forest school through some sort of action research project. And then usually they're like, oh my God, this is great. It's doing what you said it would. Now we believe you because you've put numbers on paper.
And that sort of case studies and observations, and I think if you've got another adult with you in the play space as well, how you observe and describe out loud to them can be really powerful as well, can't it? Helps them feel that you know what's going on, even if you don't, because you're describing, okay, so I'm just watching this child and they're doing this, and I've noticed this, and I'm wondering if this is happening, and kind of those sort of observations can really help people get into that observation mode rather than intervention mode, because it's dead easy if you feel out of your comfort zone to intervene, right? That's what we do. Our first response, if we're out of our comfort zone, like let's just step in, shut this down, and I'll get back in my comfort zone, and then it'll all be okay again. And actually, that's one of the ways we can support colleagues and other folk, other adults in the play space to feel a bit calmed and soothed. I think is to show that although you're not in control, you're understanding what's going on and you're observing that, and that can be, yeah, a useful strategy too.
It also perhaps also illustrates the sort of the depth of understanding, because one of the things I've noticed is if you're not trained in forest school, or you're not aware of forest school practice, and you come as a visitor to watch a session, it may appear that the adults aren't doing anything. and they're not in control and the kids are running riot. And particularly if you're not used to outdoor play or risky play, or you're coming from a very different point of value judgments, then just to step into that, it can look like, yeah, it can look like the adults aren't doing anything or they don't know what they're doing, or yeah. In fact, I've had a situation, just to share, in one of my forest schools where, just as a dramatic example, where the kids were doing a storm kettle, right? And we'd worked for many weeks of doing a storm kettle, and the kids had put like a little rope down as their boundary, and they were busy doing it. Now, because they'd been working on it for so long, there was no adult directly sitting next to them, but there was an adult just sort of behind them, kind of keeping an eye. Okay. And that day we had a visitor who'd never seen a forest school before. She's turned up in inappropriate clothing and footwear, as they do. And it's kind of like looking around what's happening. And as forest school folk know, when a storm kettle boils, it starts vibrating, doesn't it? But the kids had made their little safe zone, so the water wasn't going anywhere. Anyway, this lady, sees this going, psh, and she feels, for whatever reason, driven to step in, grabs the handle of the storm kettle, which of course then promptly goes above where the flames are, so she burns herself, drops the kettle, so the boiling water is suddenly splushing out all everywhere. But the best bit was the kids like looked at her really unimpressed, right? Going, that's not how you do it. The burn bucket's over there.
Wow. And that's part of the challenge, isn't it? It's like how well do you know the children? So when you see them, whatever they're engaged in, like your understanding of what the children are engaged in is really different to somebody who's walking in for the first time and seeing that. And that can really change our comfort levels, right? Like how well do we know the people we're with? Oh, that's really interesting. And also I was just thinking about that comfort level things as well. It's like how did we play as children? Because that's another thing, isn't it? That kind of really affects who we are in a play space and what we're comfortable with, and what experiences have we had as an adult as well. But actually, how we played as children can really impact on who we are then when we're in the play space. I was a child who climbed trees, and that I can see how that changes my perception of what's safe when people are climbing trees, because it's like, well, let's have a little look, and yeah, that's a good branch, and this, rather than, oh well, they're going too high. Yeah, they're going too high, but it's a really safe tree. Like there's a tree it's cut down now, but it had a branch basically everywhere. It was like it was a conifer. Everywhere you wanted it. You couldn't fall out of that tree if you really wanted to, I reckon. I don't think you could, because there'd just be a branch. You'd just get caught in branches, I'm pretty sure. And children would climb really high, like 30, 40 foot high. And on my sessions, this is in a site that I used to visit quite regularly, and I'd see children really high up. And I'd think, well, yeah, that tree, it's really safe. So, like, what you did as a child, how well you know the children, also how well you know the site, all of those things all impact on where our comfort levels are. And I think that's one of those think about the themes of our conversation, that can really influence how comfortable we are giving our power away. Because if we feel out of control, we don't want to give away the power. I'm just thinking about your example of that woman there. She had to take the power because she felt like things were out of control, but not seeing all the other factors in there, and where your comfort level was compared with hers. Yeah, it's interesting.
And so I mean, again, going back to a point earlier, so we've now got generations of adults who didn't have play experiences, perhaps not even sufficient indoor play experience, let alone outdoor play experiences in nature. So yeah, what if you're an adult who hasn't had outdoor play in your own childhood, we can't go back in time. So
Mm.
what can we do if we want to help children playing now and we didn't have much play experience as a child? What can we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I know the answer to it either. That's why it's a good question. Yeah. And 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 is some of that about like just giving yourself those few moments to think, is this who's out of their comfort zone here? Is it me or the children? And kind of recognizing that as well, sort of reflecting on your own play history can be helpful, can't it? Like who am I in this play space? What am I comfortable with? And I think as well, having those conversations with your colleagues can be quite interesting as well. So recognizing, I know there's a colleague that I work with sometimes, and she had an experience actually as an adult, but I know that impacts how she will support certain types of play. And so there's just kind of an unspoken thing now that I tend to go over there if it gets like that, and she will move away from it because she knows her impact on that particular play. And so it's kind of, yeah, recognizing and reflecting on that and thinking, is that a me thing, or is that actually a thing that children need to keep them safe? And yeah, how am I influencing that? I don't know. What do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, self-awareness, definitely. I'd agree with that. I'm wondering whether there's any way of also like sort of redressing the deficit as an adult as well. Um, like a lot of like the nature connection-y programs often like, connect with childhood passions and things that perhaps would be a natural part of childhood. And I've been on courses like that and seen how the adults can step into that. But I guess that's a guided situation. I'm just wondering whether that could be done in your own on your own.
Yeah, and some of those risk-taking behaviors or perceived risk-taking behaviors. So let's take climbing trees, for example. Like small children, the impact of them falling out of a tree is going to be very different to me falling out of a tree. Now, I've noticed as a admittedly now middle-aged woman that I'm a lot more cautious with my body than I was when I was a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or even a 20-year-old. It's like because I know that my body will react differently if I plummet off a wall, and my brain will not like back down when I'm like, it's all right, I can do it. So there is something in there as well, isn't there? Our bodies are designed for that sort of testing when they're younger and not as necessarily designed for that testing now. Um, but yes, yeah, I think that's where that observation and kind of really sometimes sitting with your own discomfort can come in as well. I think sometimes when we're observing children's play, there is that level of discomfort in what we're experiencing.
I wonder
Mm.
whether there's also an element of grieving for what you didn't have as well, perhaps, potentially.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, yeah, and sort of yeah, reflecting on your own play history can be really tricky actually, because like you say, there is that grief in there, or you know, um, the impact of the adults that were around us as children and how they influenced us as uh, in how we played. That can bring up all sorts of complicated stuff, can't it? But yeah, recognizing that you carry that with you and that's yours, and that you don't have to pass that on to the children. That you can hold that for yourself and not necessarily inflict it on other people.
Yeah, totally. So, as we're talking here about kind of, I guess, the adults' influence on play and on children, like what what is the optimum as a forest school practitioner and a play worker? Like, if we're an adult trying to support play, because knowing that we live in a society that perhaps is play deprived and risk adverse, we're kind of going against the flow a bit here in forest school. And I notice lots of children, they come to forest school and they don't necessarily even know how to play in the woods because they might not have experienced it before, or they're particularly the older ones seem to struggle with like the lack of outcomes, as in,
Mm.
they're waiting to please the teacher. What is it that you want us to do so we get a sticker or a grade or whatever? They're looking for external validation, and so it can take quite a time to help them get to a state of play. I'm just curious as to your thoughts on what is like the optimum way of being as an adult supporting play.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And that it's definitely a role that needs to change over time and change based on your observation. And I think I've definitely been with groups where we arrive into a space and they're like not quite sure what's expected of me here and not quite sure what I'm allowed to do and what there even is to do. Actually, I'm thinking about a nursery group that I worked with many years ago who just didn't realize that things were detachable, like sticks and leaves that were on the floor, were things you could pick up and gather. The level of um, play experience that they'd had in natural environments to that point was so minimal that they had no reference point for it. And so that adult scaffolding, that adult support needs to be quite strong in the first place if they haven't got that skill, I guess. Now, so here's a question. Is play a drive? Is play a skill? It's probably both. If so, if so, then, like, because there's that innate drive in children to play, but actually also their experience or lack of it will mean that drive is able to manifest itself in whatever environment they're in. Because if you only ever played with a baby in a pushchair, pushing it around a concrete yard, that then if you're in an environment with sticks and leaves and trees and woodlice, how do you then play? It's that transfer, isn't it, of skills? And so as adults, sometimes we need to be the people modeling or creating those permissions or creating that understanding of what's possible. But it's like, are we doing that and then are we then taking up the space or are we looking to withdraw from that? And I think that's one of those key things is yes, getting the play started, but then looking to withdraw is often where I I find myself sort of thinking, okay, how do I make this not about me anymore? And do they need that support anymore, or are they sustained in their own play? Is that permission now sufficient that they've got it? They can go on their own.
Permission is a really interesting word, isn't it? Like
Mm.
permission to play. I'm just thinking about Lily Rowe and how like she just spends the majority of her life playing. She's 4 years old, so obviously, play, drive seems to be above all other drives. Eating drive, sleeping drive, going to the toilet drive, it's all play is above all of those normal, survival things. Um, uh, she doesn't need permission to play it right at this age, at this stage. Um, but so yeah, I'm curious, when does that get turned off
Yeah.
and people feel that they need permission to play?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I also can imagine that Lily Rose growing up in an environment in which play has been valued as well. So is it the valuing of that, okay, this child needs to play. Let's just let that happen rather than stop doing that. No, no, it's time to. You should be putting on your shoe. No, I've said no to this. So it's there's something else in there, isn't there? Those permissions are maybe not explicit in the moment. You arrive at a place, you don't need to say, so Lily Rowe, you can play with this because she's got that permission built in now because of how her I'm imagining her life has been to this point. Um, but then for other children, if they haven't had those permissions kind of built into their experience of life, that then it might have to be more explicit. It might have to be clearer in order to allow that to happen. I'm just thinking about I was with a group last week who have some of those kids I've been working with for years now, like really long term. And there was somebody who came new, and they came on the second day, holiday scheme stuff. And they arrived. So we'd already kind of got back together. I think everybody who was there on the previous day had been multiple times previously. And watching somebody kind of arrive, not just new, but new, like never been in this environment before. And like the first half an hour, It's like, okay, all right. So this seems to be. And then after a little bit, I saw her again, and she's like, fully got this. I understand. Just like running through the woods, like clay on her face like this, and it was really interesting, kind of seeing that, trying to weigh up what are the rules here? What are the protocols? How? Okay, what? Okay, yeah, and then people ask adults to do that, and then the adults are like, oh, okay, let's try it. And then so later on in the day, we were talking about what we're going to do next, and she went, I think a pool party. And I was like, okay, we don't have a swimming pool. And one of the other kids went, so we need to build a swimming pool. And I was like, all right, that's where we're going next. And seeing her kind of going, oh yeah, I see what's going on here. You know, like the level of kind of the relationship between adults and children, how it's that sort of yes and bit of play, isn't it, really? Okay. So yes, we're going to have a pool party, and how are we going to find a pool? I'll let you know in the summer if I've worked that out. Because that's the next
Oh,
challenge.
a pool party.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking so far, we don't have any running water on the site, so that could be the challenge. But I'm thinking so far, pond liner, some hay bales, pool, several weeks of rain.
Get the
That's as far
kids
as I've got with my thinking.
shifting jerry cans of water.
Yeah, I mean, the nearest running water is like not even on the site. It's we have to bring all the water in from home. So yeah, let's see. I'll let you know.
Have to, yeah, rig up a rainwater harvesting system first. So
I think we've got 2 weeks. We'll be able, by the end of 2 weeks, right? We should have sussed it, surely. Yeah. But it is that sort of yes and of supporting children's plays. Like this is a thing that's like not possible, but how are we going to do it? Let's see if we can work it out. You know, it's very improbable, but let's see what happens next. Yeah, yeah, that was a will to engage with it as well, isn't it?
yeah, so listening to you talk there, it's like that mindset of being open to possibilities and improvisation, I would say, is also kind of crucial. Again, it's not a linear thing, is it? It's a weaving, multifaceted,
Yeah.
kind of unpredictable.
Yeah, and actually might have failure baked into it as well, and that's okay. You know, we can try a thing, and that's how we learn that actually you can't have a pool party in a wood with no running water. You know, maybe that's how that happens. You know, that's part of it as well, isn't it?
Which again is like a massive thing in terms of sort of the average society where, people are fearful of making mistakes. The anxiety of making mistakes can be quite crippling for some young people, well, and some adults for that matter.
Humans, full stop, right? And I think, you know, when we're talking about that impact of play deprivation, I wonder if that's something that's happening as well. Like there's an increasing fear of making mistakes and of getting things wrong and failing, and actually play is a way of just finding new things to fail at, isn't it? You know, oftentimes, you know, you kind of changing the parameters because you're like, well, I can't quite do it like this, so I'll tweak it, and actually now this is the game, and now this is the game, because you just sort of like finding that sweet spot where you can challenge yourself and feel like you might fail, but you've got control over it, and that sort of balance and flow there. Mm.
And of course, those are all crucial skills in terms of creativity. And, if you hear the stories of the great inventors or artists or entrepreneurs, like if you look at their stories,
Right.
there, Edison, he was the light bulb man, wasn't he, Edison? Didn't he
Yeah.
had
Do
like
you know,
thousands?
I was going for WD-40. That was my that was my reference point, because that's why it's called WD-40, because he made 39 things that didn't work, you know. And it's,
Yeah,
yeah.
you've got to fail. It's a necessary part of
Mm,
creation.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, and allowing that to happen, and yeah, feeling like you can go through that without being judged. Again, it's that sort of environment that we create through play and the children create through play, and that we can hold that space for as adults. Is that again that non-judgmental, that people are allowed to try things out and it's allowed to go wrong, and that's okay as well. We've got that permission to fail.
On the subject of non-judgment,
Hmm.
maybe I realise we're getting towards the end of our time. So I opened this can of worms.
What's that? There seems to be worms everywhere. What just happened?
But I don't know about you because you're a forest school trainer as well. But when I'm running forest school training, one of the biggest things that people struggle with, or perhaps is contrary to the mainstream education system, is around non-judgment at forest school. And one of my sort of my cases for the importance of non-judgment, well, one is to do with self-esteem, but the other is to do with play, because play being ideally intrinsically motivated, and therefore other people's judgments and expectations would shift that potentially. And so I kind of present that as a case for non-judgment. Now, the thing people struggle with the most is to do with praise, and how praise could actually not be that useful in terms of supporting learning and development and play. I wondered if you've got any thoughts on 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 judgment, or particularly praise, I suppose, and play.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, it goes back to that content and intent, why they play. And actually, if you've got an adult standing next to you going, "Oh, good job, well done, congrats," it's like that's part of taking the control. It's one of the ways we control people is through the feedback that we give, and and then it becomes really tricky then because like, how do we give feedback? How do we interact? How do we share our experience? And I think. Yeah, because praise is a really slippery beast, isn't it? Because it either doesn't work because it doesn't align with the person's view of themselves, and that's not very comfy, or it does align, but then it kind of directs as well. I don't know. So there's an example of praise that I use quite a lot when I'm talking about praise and different responses, and it was based on experience. This was with an older young person who'd been making a tree house, making a bird house, and he'd been hammering away at it, and kind of like making this thing, and this was somebody who'd experienced quite a lot of stress and trauma in their life. So for them to make a thing and stay with it was one, quite a significant moment. And then he was sitting in the hammock afterwards with this tree house, like singing a little song about this tree house he'd made. So this birdhouse that he'd made. And then he just looked at it and went, "This is shit." And kind of there was three adults there, and with between the three adults, we had three different responses, and I reflect on it a lot because the first response was, "No, it's not." But then what does that young person do with that? It's no, it's not. It's great. It's a really good birdhouse. Like, look at it. It's looking really good. Because that doesn't meet that person where they're at, right? So as a bit of feedback, you're just disagreeing with them. So that actually doesn't help you move on for people to disagree with you. And then the second response that between the three of us we gave was like, "But you've worked really hard." Like all the Dweck stuff about praise and praise the process, not the product, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you've worked really hard and like, look, you've spent all morning on this. Look at how hard you work. But then the problem with that is that he's worked really hard on a thing that he now thinks is shit. So the like praising the process actually doesn't change how you feel about a thing. It again, it just highlights how much effort you've put into a thing that you now hate. And that doesn't necessarily help you. And then the third response was, "Well, what's wrong with it?" I said, "Well, it needs a bit here and a bit here, and then it needs something here to kind of hold it together." "Oh, we've got more nails, we've got more wood, let's do that." And so uh, praise works if the person's excited about the thing and it's like, "Look at this, I'm really." So actually that's about connection, isn't it? Rather than praise. It's about reflecting back what somebody's saying to you. Oh, really chuffed with how this come out. Yeah, yeah, it has come out really well, hasn't it? That's not praise, that's connection and reflecting back. And so that's kind of where I try to sit with how I interact, and my feedback with others is trying to connect with where are they at with it. And if they're not in a good place, then you can't change it by just saying it is. Because that's, yeah, I think that's where I'm at with praise. I don't know. What were you thinking about that brought you to that question?
Well, it's just interesting. I'm just following on from what you said. So you've just highlighted there that its connection is much more important than judgment.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I guess we live in such a rewards-based society, just generally, and especially in the education system. Like, in your teacher training, you're basically taught that sanctions and rewards are your only option for behavior management. That's it. You don't get taught other methods. Um, so just, yeah, in terms of like how I guess the angle I'm coming from is, I've seen particularly like it does tend to be often girls who are around that sort of 8, 9-year-old girls that are sometimes really praise addicted,
Mm,
where they'll be like, look at mine. It's what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Look at this, that sort of behavior for me is a real red flag because then I kind of get thinking, well, have you made that thing because that is what you authentically want to do? It's actually is it part of your play process? Or have you done that thing because you think that I'll like it or I expect it? And
yeah.
I start thinking about that. And then if it's the latter, then that's actually destroyed the play process, right? Because they're acting in a way to please something external to themselves.
Yeah, so that sort of like it's almost like fawning behavior, isn't it? As a response where you've kind of got like somebody's not exposing any part of their self because they only want to please other people, and that not a healthy place to be, is it? And kind of yeah, reflecting on actually whose choices are in here and why are people motivated by that? Again, it's an interaction that I reflect on quite a lot and use as an example. But it was somebody who'd made something who was like, "Look at this, it's really cool," and I was like, "Yeah, it's really cool." And they were, "Does that mean I get a sticker?" Because that kind of, oh, hang on, there's an adult who's given me praise. That must mean reward. Hooray, let's go. And then I was just like instantly, yes, you do, but it's on the inside of you. Can you feel it? It's like that's what a good feeling is. That's what like joy is. That's what, that going back to that quote you were saying earlier, that connection with what's in your soul, isn't it? And that's the sort of the thing that we're trying to help people find is those things that light them up. Those that who are they? What are they excited by? What are they passionate about? And that I think is part of being a successful human, able to cope with whatever the world throws at you if you know what lights you up and how to find that joy. Yeah.
Absolutely. And their gift to the world, because the world needs people's gifts right now.
Yeah, yeah,
It
so true.
definitely
Yeah,
needs gifts.
yeah, yeah, it does.
And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I reckon it's through play that people find that. They get into the zone, the flow, that state, that's all play, isn't it?
Right, right.
And
Yeah,
you need to be able to be your true, authentic self and bring that into the world and whatever the gift is. But, so basically, play
right.
is
Yeah. It's the
essential
solution to everything. Yeah, there you go.
to humanity and to, yeah, the globe in general. We
Right.
need more play.
So if anybody asks, that's what you tell them.
Yeah, that is how we change the world, man.
Today's revolution is brought to you by play. Thank you.
Ah, well, that seems like a natural conclusion to our call. So thank you so much, Lily, for being here and spending time exploring the juiciness of play. If people want to find out more about you and your work, where can they do that? Where can they find you?
That's a great question. I am kindling play and training. You can find that website, Facebook, Kindling Lily on Instagram. Yeah, that's mostly I think where I am. And I run forest school training courses. I do occasional CPD professional development things. Although our last one, we decided that CPD stood for cake, playing, and dossing around. So, that's how we roll sometimes. But yeah, yeah. So, and I'm in Cumbria in the north of England.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Lily.
Well, thanks, Lou. That's
Any
good.
uh, any closing words or final thoughts?
Well, I don't think we can. I think we've started a revolution, so we just better crack on with it, eh?
Get playing.
Better get playing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lily.
Thanks, Lou. Really appreciate you.